If you'd like to ask a question during that time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you'd like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Ms. Vink, you may now begin.
Thank you, Kanika. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Danielle Vink, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Advisor webcast, EnterpriseOne with LDAP OID. Today's speakers are Miles Gavahan and James Booth. We expect today's webcast to last around 60 minutes, including a brief Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's recorded PowerPoint presentation, along with audio, can be found on My Oracle Support under My Oracle Support Training Central and Recorded Training. New webcasts are posted approximately 48 hours after the presentation. As I mentioned, at the end of the presentation, we will open for a brief Q&A session. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so by either using the chat feature or via your phone connection. Questions entered via chat will be read aloud at the end of the presentation. What you see on your screen at this time is a reminder that this Advisor webcast is intended for informational purposes only. Any features or functionality described for Oracle's products remains at the sole discretion of Oracle. Now we'll go ahead and get started. Miles and James, if you guys are ready, I'll turn the webcast over to you and you can begin.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay, so my name is Miles Gavahan, and we're going to be discussing this morning EnterpriseOne with OID, our Oracle Internet Directory. I'm just going to refer to it as OID from now on. So OID is Oracle Directory Service. It's one of many directory services. Other directory services include Microsoft Active Directory and IBM Domino. OID is very, very powerful LDAP directory service. It's been tested with many, many entries, and basically it's like a relational database, but it's not quite as complex as a relational database. It allows you to perform many, many very simple transactions on simple units of data, typically user IDs, passwords, address books, telephone numbers, email addresses, things like that. When EnterpriseOne talks to LDAP OID, we just want the user ID and the password. So you can, if you have existing directory services, it's quite common that enterprises have different directory services. You can consolidate them all into OID to facilitate administration. Basically, the idea of LDAP in general is to simplify users' password management and to simplify system administrators' lives so that people only have one user ID and one password to remember at once. Okay, so I'm just moving on to the next slide now. Our agenda, we'll be talking about LDAP, what it is, some features of Oracle Internet Directory in particular, the installation process of OID. Then I'm going to be handing it over to James, who's going to walk us through EnterpriseOne with LDAP, the order of setting up EnterpriseOne with LDAP, which basically entails setting up the search, the authentication process, and finally, when you do have it all set up in LDAP, you're going to want to synchronize all that data back into E1. We're going to have a look at troubleshooting tips, a few tools that you can use, the correct logs to get, a brief FAQ, then we're going to hand it over to Q&A. So like I said, here's a picture of the generic LDAP directory hierarchy. What we're looking at is the Directory Information Tree, or DIT. And just looking at this slide, you see the way that it functions. We have, right in the center, we have the purple box which represents the root. Everything is always a member of the root. And within that root, within the organization, within the country, you have organizational unit, or OU. And if you look at the violet colored box towards the left, there's my user ID and a colleague's user ID. And the way that the DIT, the Directory Information Tree, works is with distinguished names. A distinguished name is basically equivalent to a unique key. And so my unique key here on the left is common name Miles Gavahan, the language English, and my UID, user ID, typically used to refer to users in LDAP, is M. Gavahan. So we're both people, and we're also members of groups. One thing to remember is an EnterpriseOne role, if you're going to handle roles within LDAP, is equivalent to an OID group, and we'll look at that setup a little bit later with James. Like I said, within LDAP, the object does not have to be a user. It can be a role, it can be a printer, server, fax machine, whatever. But everything in there is identified by a unique key, distinguished name, which identifies it all the way back to the root of the DIT. So here, the E1 application is requesting a search of the DIT for these two users. So this is what OID looks like. You can see at the top, you have our user Bob. He's got his distinguished name, common name equals Bob. Within common name equals users. And you can see the typical format for LDAP is to start at the left with the most specific value, then move your way all the way up the tree, finally to JD Edwards, finally to com, which is the root of the tree. And that's Bob's distinguished name, which is how we find check. OID currently is LDAP version 3 compliant. If you want to use any version of LDAP, as long as it's version 3 compliant, then EnterpriseOne should be able to speak to it, should be able to retrieve data from version 3 compliant version of LDAP. Here's a few pieces of terminology in generic LDAP. Common name, usually a distinguished name, the unique key is made up of several common names. We'll start at the left with a name, then we move on to, for example, the business unit within an organization, then to the organization, then to the country. That would be a typical unique path. And each object has a unique distinguished name. INET.org person is what OID uses to describe a user. That's a class which contains several attributes, and that's how the structure works within OID. Like I said before, an LDAP group is equivalent to an EnterpriseOne role. O is organization, C country. SAM account name is the service name. You can use that to map your E1 user IDs to. That's a possibility, or you can use other variables. User account control, that controls which users can actually get into OID and do things and can access data. We also have access control points within OID. OU means organizational unit. DC refers to a domain component, and usually the component is a component of the distinguished name that we identify the data by. Okay, so let's look at OID install really quickly. OID install order is really similar to a lot of Fusion middleware components. The first piece that you need, and this is what makes OID really powerful, is OID actually sits on top of an Oracle database. So you would typically have a dedicated database to store all of this metadata in. So the first thing you're going to do is install Oracle 11G database. Very, very generic install. You don't need to set anything special for storage or backup, anything like that. It's just a very, very simple database install. Then we're going to install the schemas and the table spaces to store our OID information in, the metadata. Then we run our WebLogic install. We're not going to create a domain at this point. We're just going to install the foundation code. And finally, the last piece is we're going to install LDAP. Currently, the supported version is 11.1.1.5. We're going to install the base version of 11.1.1.2, and then upgrade to 11.1.1.5. Okay. So here's our database install. Like I said, we're not going to be using real application clusters. We're not going to be setting data warehouse. Not doing anything special, just pretty much taking all the defaults to store our schemas and table spaces in. One thing we do need to do is we do need to set a couple of parameters. We need to increase the amount of processes, increase the amount of open cursors, and all this is documented in the guide, which we're going to be referring to later on. WebLogic install. OID is an application that lives within WebLogic, if you like, and talks to Oracle database. So you do need to have WebLogic installed. And again, it's another very, very simple WebLogic installation. We're not going to be setting anything complex we're just going to be putting that foundation code down there for WebLogic. And at this point, we don't create a domain. RCU is what creates our repositories. We select right at the start of the install. You have various options available. You can install Web Center repositories. We're going to choose OID repositories to install. And we need to point out, obviously, our database details at the correct credentials so that RCU can populate our database correctly with that metadata. So we go to OTM, download the zip file, go ahead and extract the zip file, and then run rcu.bat as an administrator on Windows. We're going to choose to create component schemas into a database, verify that our database connection is good. When you have RCU, when you have our repositories in place, you can go to Oracle Enterprise Manager, check that those table spaces and schemas are in place. Next step you're going to do is go to config.cmd, config.sh. You are going to create a new domain for OID. Use your existing WebLogic home. You're going to choose the product, point it correctly back to the database, and we're also going to set the LDAP administrator credential. So let's move on and go through a few slides showing that. Create a new domain. The domain name is IBM domain. Enter our WebLogic credentials. Point it back to our existing WebLogic home. Here we choose Oracle Internet Directory, Oracle Directory Integration Platform. Depending on your setup, you can choose HTTP server or not. Point it back to the database. And here you can see yet another example of distinguished name within LDAP. We have the domain component set to mlab, moving back up to the root of the tree, jdedwards.com, and the format of our administrator username, which E1 is going to use to open the connection to LDAP, to OID, is common name equals Oracle admin. Put in the password for Oracle admin, go away and run the installation of the domain. When you've done that, you need to check that the OID server is up and running. Everything looks good here. So now you should be able to sign on and use ODSM, Oracle Directory Services Manager. You can also access OID through Enterprise Manager. You can see here you can use OID like we're doing or Oracle Virtual Directory. The benefit of using Oracle Virtual Directory is that you can kind of cheat and get past the E1 limitation with only having one LDAP server if you're using Oracle Virtual Directory. So here we choose Connect to a Directory, and this is when we get into OID itself. Enter our username and password. And in order to create users within OID, you're going to go to Data Browser right at the top left. And you're going to just basically right-click on users. You can go ahead, hit create, or you can choose create like if you like the format of the users that you've already created. Here we have a few example users created, and you can see the DIT structure in its entirety going right from the root at the top down to the users at the bottom. Coming back to our user Bob, this is what he looks like. Here are his attributes. We're going to be using inet of person, which is a user class to describe Bob. Here's his various details, SAM account name, and email address. Okay, so typically a client would set everything up in Oracle Internet Directory first. Make sure that other third-party software can access this data fine. And that's when they think about setting up the users in EnterpriseOne, mapping those variables across the LDAP so that everything can talk to each other successfully. And we do tend to keep it very simple. We only use the user ID and the user password, occasionally the user role relationship for EnterpriseOne to talk to LDAP. Okay, so at this stage I'm going to hand over to my colleague James to walk us through EnterpriseOne with LDAP.
Thanks, Charles. Alright, first of all, now that OID is installed and configured, we need to get data from EnterpriseOne into LDAP. Then we're going to drive into EnterpriseOne in our P95928 setup, which is where we configure our server mappings and attributes. We will then configure the default user profile setup, which we'll explain in a little bit. Then we have to set our LDAP configuration server to active and enable LDAP synchronization. How do we get our info from EnterpriseOne into LDAP? We have a handy little utility, data for LDAP, which is actually residing on the OID server. It's pretty much a batch utility you're going to want to run one time that will pull information and dump it into LDAP. We'll populate LDAP with information from EnterpriseOne. Here are a few of the common switches we can use. A couple different ways we can do this. We can overwrite all data in LDAP. We can just pull information from EnterpriseOne in LDAP, only using information that doesn't already exist in LDAP. You can pull over roles, or you can set it to not pull over roles. If you were to run data for LDAP with the help switch, it would bring all this up for you as well. Now, before we drive into the P95928 to actually configure LDAP, we want to make sure LDAP synchronization is turned off. This is handled in JDE-INI. So we would drive into Server Manager, and you see down towards the bottom, Enable LDAP Authentication at the moment is unchecked. We need to make sure that is unchecked and then restart services. We can then drive into either fast pathing directly to P95928 or drive down through the menus we show here, which brings us to the LDAP server setup. This is where it shows us server name, location, port, description, all that information. And as you can see here, the different versions of LDAP that are supported. We've got down below IBM, OID, Microsoft Active Directory. And a little bit of information about the LDAP server tables. Notice here also we can see the LDAP admin ID and LDAP admin password. Just to clarify, this does not need to be configured in EnterpriseOne. This is only the ID and password that EnterpriseOne uses to communicate with LDAP. So it needs to be in LDAP, but not in EnterpriseOne. And going on OID, before you create an LDAP configuration for OID, you must manually add OID as an option in the LDAP server type field of the LDAP server configuration workbench, P95928. To do so, use the user-defined code application, which is P0004A, to add a UDC for OID. Which brings us to the OID server configuration. Here you can see the server location, ports, LDAP server location and port, server type, and again, you can see the LDAP admin ID and admin password. If we're going to be using SSL or roles, this is where you activate it by checking the applicable box. Here we see our server mappings. We've got the EnterpriseOne user ID attribute, user ID search attribute, and again we've got the role name attribute and the role search attribute. To clarify this a little bit, the EnterpriseOne user ID attribute is the user ID attribute in LDAP that EnterpriseOne is searching on when creating a new entry. The user ID search attribute is the filter we're using to search, and then somewhat the same for role name. That's mapped to the role name in LDAP from EnterpriseOne. The role search attribute is the filter that we're using to search that role name. And you can see in the table F009282 where these values are stored. Moving on to the OID server attributes. For users and roles, here we have roles activated, so we see those three options. We've got our search base, filter, and scope. The search base is pretty much just that. It's the base level that we are searching in LDAP. Here you can see common name users, domain component jadedword.com. Search filter, we are searching for an object class of unnetworked person. And the user search scope we have set to subtree, which is the default. The three different levels for the search scope, you can have it set to base, which only searches the values specified in the role search base setting. Subtree is what we use, is the default value which searches the entire OU. You can also set an entry of one level, which searches only one level down from the search base field. And again, we've got those entries for roles. Here you can see in F009281, the LDAP server attributes values table. Here we're going to talk about our default user. Think of this almost as a template. Say a user tries to log into EnterpriseOne for the very first time. EnterpriseOne, when LDAP is activated, heads over to LDAP to authenticate that user. And if EnterpriseOne gets the go-ahead, it will create a new user account using the information from the default user. We've got our user profile, role relationships, and system user where we configure this information. When assigning roles to a new user, you use the default user. Here, we would assign roles to the default user. And again, think of roles in EnterpriseOne as groups in LDAP. So you would manually need to create your roles in EnterpriseOne to directly mirror the groups in LDAP. So when a user logs in, gets the go-ahead, and a new account is created with the default user info, it pulls the assigned roles from here and assigns them to that new user. Now, this is one thing that LDAP is not concerned with, is the default default system user. When a new account is created, the system user is how EnterpriseOne connects to the database. So this is EnterpriseOne only connecting to the database. So when a new user logs in and a new account is created with the default user info, this is where it would pull the system user. You can also set the allowed password attempts. Okay, once we have EnterpriseOne configured with our server mappings, attributes, we set up the default user. We would set the LDAP server to active. One note is you can only have one active LDAP configuration per port. We head back to Server Manager and activate LDAP authentication in the JDE INI. And here, after checking that box, you would need to bounce EnterpriseOne services. And we're rocking and rolling on LDAP. This gives us a little show of how it works. Say a user on a laptop is logging in to EnterpriseOne. The EnterpriseOne security kernel, if LDAP is activated, heads over to the server that you've already configured. LDAP gives go-ahead for the user to log in, and a new account is created with the default user information. Here we have a little chart showing how we bind the LDAP connection. We use our admin user ID and password to search the directory for user ID language preference from LDAP. We get our distinguished name, our unique distinguished name, and we then authenticate. And again, if it's the very first time user logs in, pull the info from the default user and create that user a new account. This is a little show of searching EnterpriseOne. We've got our user search base as the starting point for the search, looking for a distinguished name. We've got our user search scope with our base one level of subtree entry of how deep we're searching. And we've got our filter indicating what to search. For example, an object class, unknown person. You can use this filter here to search for all entries in user ID, which will return us, hopefully, a unique, distinguished name. Here you can see some of the tables that LDAP synchronizes to in EnterpriseOne. And a small comparison of LDAP versus E1 and what they're concerned with. When pulling information from LDAP, EnterpriseOne is only concerned with the user ID, the password, and the role relationship. In EnterpriseOne specific, we use the user profile address book number, decimal separator, time zone, currency, and date format, all of which LDAP is not concerned with. And again, think of roles as groups in LDAP. Now that LDAP is switched on, what can we do? Can we change our password in E1? Nope, that's got to be handled on the LDAP side. Can we add, copy, or delete users in EnterpriseOne? Nope, again, LDAP overrides, and we do that on the LDAP side. Can we change our user status in EnterpriseOne? Yes, we can actually do that. We can also set the allowed number of password changes, so we can activate or deactivate a user in EnterpriseOne depending on the allowed number of password changes. Can we add, delegate, or remove roles? Only to the default user. Again, remember, role relationship is managed by LDAP, not necessarily roles and groups themselves. We need to have roles configured in EnterpriseOne mirrored to groups in LDAP. The relationship of what roles are assigned to the default user is handled in EnterpriseOne, and the roles or groups assigned to a user is handled in LDAP. Can we add, change, or delete the system user? Yes, this is stored in F98LWSEC. Again, assigned with the default user. The system user is used to connect to the database in EnterpriseOne. How about our roles? Role definition needs to be in both E1 and LDAP. Again, LDAP is going to call it groups. If user role relationship is stored in EnterpriseOne, then role information for our LDAP default user is used to create user role relationships. Got to have that role enabled in LDAP checked if you're using the role relationship synchronization. Again, think of a role in EnterpriseOne as a group in LDAP. Roles in EnterpriseOne that are not in LDAP will be deleted. Again, LDAP overrides EnterpriseOne. The user role relationship synchronized from LDAP to E1. You add your roles in EnterpriseOne to the default user only. And terms like start all and expiration dates are stored in EnterpriseOne. And here is just a screen clip of groups in OID. You can think of a role as a group. And remember how we spoke about data for LDAP, moving data from EnterpriseOne to LDAP. If you need to go the reverse and synchronize from Active Directory OID to E1, you can run R92-00040. Again, think of it as a batch utility, a one-time synchronization that will pull information from LDAP and do a bulk dump into EnterpriseOne. Here to show LDAP over SSL. The SSL-enabled LDAP server is checked. You'll activate two different fields of the port and the certificate location, which is handled outside of EnterpriseOne. And that's all EnterpriseOne is really concerned with is the port stock and where that certificate is stored. I will now turn it back over to Miles, who is going to go over a little troubleshooting, some simple logs, and our quick cheat sheet in FAQs.
Thank you, James. Okay, so when there's an issue with EnterpriseOne talking to LDAP, usually it happens at 3 different points. There's a problem connecting to LDAP, and usually there's a problem with the port you have set up for the LDAP server or the permissions. If there's a problem searching in LDAP, then there's a problem with the way that you set up the mappings and the attributes. We're going to take a look at a tool in a little while which will help us troubleshoot cases like that. And finally, if you have issues synchronizing data back to EnterpriseOne, then you need to look at the way that you set up your default user or the user and role. So this is the tool. It doesn't have to be LDP.exe, it can be any LDAP browser. And basically what this tells us is whether LDAP was working successfully before you introduced EnterpriseOne into the mix. The screens that James was walking you through earlier, showing all those values and where you're going to search exactly. You can see here we have our filter, we have our base, and we have our scope. This is the base that we're going to search on initially, the filter is the value that we're passing, and the scope that we have set here is the subtree. So as long as this works, as long as this returns you one unique user ID, then EnterpriseOne should work as well. It's exactly the same mechanism. So that would be step 1, trying to troubleshoot why EnterpriseOne can't authenticate against LDAP once you have it switched on. So I'm just going to look at a couple of logs here because these are logs, security kernel logs, that we typically ask you for. You would set trace equal to 3 in your enterprise server JDE.ini, and I'm just going to look at the first one, which is a successful log. It shows the binding happening successfully, the admin user is authenticating against LDAP successfully. And we're using SAM account name, the object class is the user. You can see in the top log our base, scope, and also the filter that we're passing. And then finally, the user that we're looking for once we've completed that bind with LDAP. And there are a couple more logs showing failing searches, but you should always have this level of detail in the security kernel logs, which is showing the bind initially with the admin user and password, showing the search first for the user and then for the role. You should always have that information in the logs. So here's our FAQ. Typically, we would not recommend having special characters within your users or your groups for LDAP. Is LDAP the same as single sign-on? No, it's not. Although you're using the same credentials, you're not passing a security token anywhere. If you're using several different softwares, you need to enter the same user ID, the same user password again and again for each type of software. Which port should I use? Typically 3060 for OID. There's an application you might be familiar with, P0092SS, a self-service application. So they'll let users add their own users and roles. No, this is not recommended. It's best for a system administrator to handle all of the security work on that. What happens when I need to change my password? You're not going to receive any notification of this through EnterpriseOne. This is all going to take place at the OID level. Like James told you, how do I get my EnterpriseOne users to LDAP? You can either enter it manually in LDAP to begin with, or you can use data for LDAP.exe to put all of your EnterpriseOne users into LDAP. And as James walked you through before, we're going to use R920040 to get our LDAP users to EnterpriseOne, or else you can simply sign on, and that should pull all that data from LDAP and populate it as per the default user, just like James walked you through. How do I set up my system user in LDAP? This is set up in EnterpriseOne, separate database user, it doesn't have anything to do with LDAP. What types of LDAP are supported? Any version 3 compliant service. Version 3 has been around now for a lot of years. As long as it's compliant with version 3, as long as LDP.exe can talk to your LDAP, and EnterpriseOne should be able to talk to your LDAP. Can I make any changes to an existing user in LDAP and hope that the same change will get made to my EnterpriseOne user? No. EnterpriseOne will register that as a completely new user, so you get a new user in EnterpriseOne too. Can't do that. Like I said, the data that gets stored in LDAP is really very simple. It's just a user ID and password. You can't store address book information, email addresses, and the like for EnterpriseOne there, no. Yeah, password is 10 characters or less in LDAP because it's an EnterpriseOne limitation. If it would be too much trouble to change, yes, the password needs to be 10 characters or less. Occasionally we have problems with OCM mappings. LDAP tables are pointing to business data instead of being system-wide, so make sure that in both system and server maps you have OCM mappings for these three tables. Make sure data for LDAP does need write permission, so make sure that that's set up correctly. There are two versions of P95928 when you're setting up LDAP, so make sure that you don't use the template version, which is the 0001 version. It will allow you to add a live active configuration. And finally, if you do have a very complex intricate structure in LDAP, it's best to set it at the subtree and not just at the base, so that it can search through all those different levels of LDAP. And if you're on Windows, you should receive your normal password expiry. Okay, so if you are setting up LDAP and you have permission, these are the documents that we're going to add for. We're going to ask for the logs with sector equal to 3 and security section of the enterprise server ini file, all of the screenshots, 3 sets of screens, P95928 server setup, P95928 attributes, P95928 mappings. Does LDP.exe work? That's a typical question. Are you using SSL? Are you managing your roles in LDAP? What type of LDAP are you using? These are the types of LDAP that we support. Here are some resources. I've just really skimmed over what OID is. There's lots of resources out there on OID to understand it and initial setup a little bit better. You can look at our 9.1 security guide to look at EnterpriseOne talking to LDAP, and here are a few links that we've put there just to explain OID a bit better. And some notices about generic LDAP. Okay, with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Miles and Zane. Kamika, do we have any questions on phone line?
At this time, there are no audio questions.
Thank you. Thanks. I hope everyone found the presentation valuable. I do have a few questions in the chat, so I'll read those aloud, and we'll go back and forth to see if anyone comes in with questions on the phone line. Some of these may have been answered, but I'll go ahead and read them out anyway. And I do apologize in advance. I hope I get everyone's names right. Our first question is from Ramandeep Singh. I cannot say your last name, I'm sorry. What is the role of security server when LDAP is on?
There is no role for security server. Basically, all of the typical EnterpriseOne security functions are disabled as soon as you turn LDAP on. And if you try to do anything in user profile, security, or role, you just get a message saying this is all handled by LDAP now.
Thank you. From the same caller, starting from which release can we configure LDAP to V1?
I think it is 894.
Again, from the same caller. They want to integrate their existing 9.0 with LDAP. Please guide me through the steps involved in that.
Yeah, you're going to receive this presentation a little bit later, and James showed you the various steps that you need in the order that you need to set up. You would follow that setup, basically set your users in OID, and then you need to make sure LDAP authentication is turned off. Then you need to go to the LDAP application itself, set up the server, set up the mapping, set up the attributes, configure your default user, and then switch LDAP on, I believe. But like I said, that's all documented in the presentation.
I do have a few more questions in the chat, but I'll check with the phone lines again. Kamika, do we have anyone with questions?
There are no audio questions.
Alright, we'll keep going with the chat questions. I have a question from Robert Melander. Just for roles, if you don't tick that box in the setup, I assume that you still can manage that in Data E, or am I wrong?
Yes, that's completely correct. You're still completely separate to LDAP. If you don't choose roles enabled in LDAP, you handle those in E1.
From Jeremy Milet, it's not required that you manage roles in LDAP, right?
It's not required, no. It's a possibility.
And Normand Lavelle, does 80-2008 R2, is that supported?
If it's version 3 compliant, it's supported, yes.
Tamika, do you have any questions on the phone?
There are no audio questions.
Alright, we'll give everyone just a few more moments to compile any additional questions in the chat or on the phone as well, and let me know if any questions I ask need more clarification. During this time, I'd like to remind everyone of a few things. Within 48 hours after today's advisor webcast, an email with the download streaming link will be sent to all of those enrolled, in addition to being posted on my Oracle support in an advisor webcast archive recording, document 740964.1. And again, you can find the same information via my Oracle support, Training Central, and recorded training. If you do think of a question after today's presentation ends, you can reply to the email you'll receive with the download streaming link, and your question will be sent to the presenters to answer on a one-off basis. Do you have any questions, Tamika?
There are no questions.
All right. Remember to check the live webcast schedule regularly for new upcoming advisor webcasts. You can also find this via my Oracle Support Training Central or in the webcast section of the product area of my Oracle Support community. If you have an idea for a future webcast, please let us know. You can suggest these via the email you'll receive with your recording or to the specific product support team via the my Oracle Support community. Do you have any questions on the line, Tamika?
There are no questions.
I just have one thank you from Robert Miranda on the chat and Ramandeep. It seems like everyone's saying thank you guys for a very clear presentation. I will say that as well. We'll round up. So again, I hope everyone found the advisor webcast valuable. We look forward to you joining us again. Please enjoy the remainder of your day.
This does conclude today's webcast. Thank you for joining. You may now disconnect your line. PM Advisor webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you, Ms. Barstad. You may begin.
Thank you. Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Bonnie Barstad, and I would like to welcome you to today's Oracle Process Manufacturing Advisor webcast titled Picking and Using Picking Rules with OPM Batches. Our speaker today is Glenn Roll, Oracle Principal Technical Support Engineer. We expect today's webcast to last approximately 60 minutes, including a brief Q&A session. Today's recorded PowerPoint presentation, along with the audio, can be found on the Process Manufacturing Advisor webcast calendar and archive, my Oracle Support Doc ID 1064676.1, a few days after this presentation. Questions may be submitted to me throughout the presentation via the chat or the Q&A. Just look for the icons located on the toolbar at the top of this WebEx session. Your questions will be collected and read aloud in the order received during the Q&A at the end of this presentation. Please remember this advisor webcast is intended for informational purposes only. Any features or functionality described for Oracle's products remains at the sole discretion of Oracle. Now let's get started with our presentation. Glenn, if you're ready, I'll turn the webcast over to you and you may begin.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everybody. My name is Glenn Rule, and we're going to be talking about picking and using picking rules with OPM batches. We're going to start with a brief overview of picking rules and what they're used for. Then we'll go into a little bit more detail on some of their uses in auto-detailing of batches. That's the automatic creation of detailed reservations. We'll talk about select available inventory. We'll talk about picking itself at kind of a high level to start with. Then we'll go into the details of setting up your picking rules. We'll talk about the hierarchy of defaults for the rules. And then we'll go into some more detail and depth on picking itself and the creation of move orders for batches. We're then going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting some issues. We'll discuss some gotchas and some known issues. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So, overview. Picking rules in Release 12. For those of you who are familiar with 11i OPM, the picking rules replace the auto-allocation rules that we had in 11i. They're a way to have the system automatically select inventory based on rules such as first in, first out, FIFO, first expired, first out, FIFO, and other considerations that we'll talk about in a little while. The picking rules are used for three different purposes in batches in OPM. Auto detail, select available inventory, and picking itself. Auto detail is the automatic creation of detailed reservations for ingredients based on picking rules. It's analogous to auto allocation for batches that we had in 11i OPM. From the batch detail screen, you go to the inventory menu and select auto detail batch to create reservations for all of the ingredients in your batch, or auto detail line to create reservations just for the specific ingredient line that you're sitting on. This is only for ingredients. It's not for products or byproducts. One slight difference from 11i, when you want auto detail to take place, you have to initiate it from the batch. There's no fully automatic auto allocation like there was in 11i when a batch is created. Although you do have the ability to automatically create high-level reservations when a batch is first created. But the automatic creation of the detailed reservations has to be initiated from the batch. Here we have a screenshot of the batch detail screen, just to show you where you do this from. So cursor sitting on ingredient, and we've gone up to the inventory menu on the batch and selected auto detail batch. And as you can see, auto detail line is the option just below it. The two options right above, reserve batch and reserve line, are used for creating high-level reservations. That's a reservation at an organization level, which does not go down to the lot sub-inventory locator level. So that doesn't involve picking rules. It just goes out to see if you have enough inventory and create a high-level reservation. Auto detail batch and auto detail line are what you use to create the detail level reservations for your ingredients. And that first option, maintain reservations, is for manual entry of reservations. It does the same thing as the button, the reservations button on the bottom. It takes you to the item reservations window, and you could manually enter reservations there. You can edit reservations, or you can just look to see the reservation that was created through auto detail. Second place in which picking rules are used is select available inventory. This is a function that presents you with a list of the available inventory for a specific ingredient line in a batch. It's analogous to the pick lots functionality that we had in 11i. And this uses the picking rules that you set up as part of the filtering criteria to determine what lots to show you as available, and also in sorting the inventory, showing you the inventory in a specific order. It can be accessed from the Tools menu on the Item Reservation window in Batches to select lots to reserve to the batch. You can also use it when you're creating material transactions to select lots to actually consume and transact in the batch. The select available inventory takes into account your on-hand quantities, any reservations against those quantities where the material is already reserved to some other document. It takes into account material status, if you're using that, whether a lot is reservable or usable for WIP issue batch transactions. Takes into account expiration and the shelf days on picking rules. And that's true of auto detail also, as well as picking. All of those things are taken into account. And here we have a screenshot of showing you how to get to select available inventory. So from the batch detail screen, we've clicked on reservations to open the item reservation window, and then go up to the Tools menu and to select available inventory. And that takes us to the select available inventory screen itself. And so this presents you with a list of all of the lots and the sub-inventories and locators where those lots exist that are available to be reserved to the batch, as well as the available quantities, and you select what you want. And the third area in which picking rules are used is picking itself. This is sort of a new concept in Release 12 that we didn't really have in 11i. Picking creates move orders to move material from, let's say, a storage location or warehouse, stores, to the shop floor for consumption in a batch. If you're storing ingredients in a raw material warehouse and you need to move that inventory to the shop floor before consuming it in the batch, you can use picking to create that move order and to allocate that move order based on the picking rules. It will automatically select which lots to pick and from what sub-inventory and what locator based on FIFO, FIFO, whatever additional rules you've specified on picking rules. And we'll talk about more details of picking later on in the presentation, but just wanted to show you how you access it from batch details. You just click on this picking button here at the bottom of the batch screen. Next, we're going to talk about the setup of picking rules, and then after that, we'll actually go through the whole picking process in more detail. So, picking rule setup. You define picking rules for batches on the Inventory Picking Rules screen. This is under the Inventory responsibility. It's not under Production Supervisor. If you've purchased the Warehouse Management System and you're in a WMS-enabled org, then there's a different rule screen in the Warehouse Manager responsibility for setting up your picking rules. We'll talk about that just very briefly. The way that the interaction of picking rules with batches works is exactly the same whether you're using inventory picking rules or WMS picking rules. But the details of setting up and defining your picking rules and what kind of criteria you can use is much more extensive in WMS than in inventory. And we're not going to get into the details of all of the different types of rule setup you can do in WMS. That's beyond the scope of this presentation. We will go through the details of inventory picking rules, and then how the picking rules interact with batches, which is the same for inventory and WMS. So the criteria or the parameters that you can specify with inventory picking rules are things like should the lots be selected based on a first in, first out method or a first expired, first out method? Is partial allocation allowed? In other words, if your batch ingredient line requires 100 kilograms and you only have 75 kilograms available, should we go ahead and auto-detail that or pick that, or should we only proceed if the full 100 is available? You can specify whether a single lot has to be selected or multiple lots. So again, if you need 100 kilograms, is it okay to take 75 kilograms from one lot, 25 kilograms from another, or does the whole 100 kilograms have to be taken from a single lot? And we have shelf life days. For example, if you have your shelf life days set to 30, then the system will not select any lot that's going to expire within 30 days. This basically duplicates the functionality that we had in 11i with our auto allocation rules. So everything you could do before with auto allocation rules in 11i, you can do in 12 and 12.1 with the inventory picking rules. And if you use WMS, then there are further additional and more sophisticated rules that you can use as well. So here's a screenshot of the inventory picking rules screen. As I said, it's accessed from the inventory responsibility. You're going to set up rules and picking. For batches, you need to set that applicable to field to OPM manufacturing. The other options are sales orders and I think whip jobs for discrete manufacturing. You have the option of specifying shelf life days, and as we discussed, single lot allocation, partial allocation. The customer spec match isn't relevant for OPM batches. And then you define your sort criteria. In this case, I've just chosen one, and I've set up this picking rule to select inventory based on expiration date, first expired, first out. So this defines the parameters of your picking rules, but you still need to then define under what conditions which picking rule is going to be selected. To do that, you click on the assignment button in the lower right of the screen, and that takes you to the rules workbench. This specifies which rule should be used when. You can specify it by organization, by item. You can say for some items you might want to use FIFO, some you might want to use FIFO, might want to have different shelf life days, etc. You can specify the transaction source or transaction type, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in a minute. That's very important. You can specify a date range to use, and there's a number of other criteria. So here's the rules workbench. The rule we were looking at a minute ago is the last one here. You can enable or disable the various different assignments. The system will go through this list in order to see and evaluate whether the criteria specified here are met for the particular ingredient line where you're doing auto detail or select available inventory or picking. And it will select the first enabled rule that meets the criteria. So if you're doing picking for a specific item, it will ignore the rules here for different items, etc. As we scroll over, we see some additional fields. This transaction source field is very important. It's very important that for an OPM picking rule, an OPM batch picking rule, that you specify job or schedule for the transaction source. Even though on the picking rule itself we've selected OPM manufacturing, you still should enter job or schedule, which is sort of a broad term that encompasses both discrete jobs as well as OPM batches. If you don't, you can run into some conflicts between your sales order picking rules and your batch picking rules. If you're doing picking or auto detail or whatever in a batch, and the system comes here and starts going through the list of available picking rules, if you don't have a transaction source specified, it could possibly select a rule that is actually for sales orders rather than batches. It goes to that picking rule, sees that it's selected, that it's a sales order picking rule rather than batch picking rule, and it will just fail at that point. It's not smart enough to say, oh, I can't use this, let me come back here and look for another. So that's why you want to specify job or schedule so that only OPM manufacturing batch picking rules are selected here. And also, if you set up other picking rules for sales orders, make sure that you specify a transaction source of sales order. So that just prevents a sales order rule from being used for batch picking or a batch picking rule being used for sales order picking. This is just a screenshot of the WMS rules screen. And as I said, we're not going to get into the details of what criteria you can set up in WMS rules and what everything means, but you can see just right, a quick glance at the screen, that it's much more extensive and much more sophisticated. You can set up your WMS rules here. So the rules hierarchy. First, when you're doing picking or auto detail or select available inventory, system's going to first look at that rules workbench that we just looked at to try to find what picking rule to use. If it's not able to find a picking rule there, an enabled picking rule, if either the situation doesn't meet any of the criteria there, or maybe you don't have enabled rules there or whatever, it will then use a default at the organization level. On the organization parameters screen on the ATP pick item sourcing tab, you can enter a default picking rule. And so that's where the system will look if it can't find one that meets the criteria on that rules workbench. If there isn't one specified on the organization level either, the system by default will use the rule ID equals 2 picking rule, which is absolute LIFO, first in, first out. I don't think that's something that any process manufacturer would actually want to be used for selecting inventory. So make sure that you have an organization default set to catch anything that doesn't meet the criteria on rules workbench. But really, unless you want the same rules used throughout your organization, set up the rules on rules workbench so that the correct rule is picked. Okay, so now we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the actual picking process and the creation of move orders. First thing I want to note is that on the batch detail screen for each ingredient, you have to have specified a supply sub-inventory and locator on the ingredient line in order for picking to know the destination of the move order. In other words, where to move the material to. So if you're needing to move the material to your shop floor, you need to specify the sub-inventory and locator that represents your shop floor. And there's the defaulting hierarchy for that supply sub-inventory and locator. You can specify an org level default on the process execution parameters screen in production supervisor setup. You can specify an item default when you're creating your item on the organization item screen. And you can also enter or edit these fields directly on the batch detail screen. And we'll take a look at that screenshot in that field in a moment. One thing I want to note is that this field is not used to direct auto detail to look first in the sub-inventory. Something that a lot of customers have been confused about. They've entered a sub-inventory on their ingredient line, and they think that, okay, if they do auto detail to create a detailed reservation, that the system is going to look first in the sub-inventory that's been specified on the ingredient line. That's not the case. Auto detail is going to go directly to the picking rules and go through the rules that have been defined there. It doesn't know anything about the sub-inventory that's been specified here on the ingredient line. This is used for where the material should be moved to in picking, not for where to get the material from in auto detail. One of the things to note with picking, if you already have specified a detailed reservation for your ingredients, either by running auto detail or by entering a reservation manually, entering one using selected inventory, whatever. If you have a detailed reservation, when you click the picking button, when you actually do picking, the move order will honor that reservation instead of going out to picking rules and using the picking rules to select what material to move. This is that sub-inventory and locator field that I just talked about on the batch detail screen. Wanted you to see where those need to be entered. Like I said, if you don't have these fields filled in, picking will not work because picking simply doesn't know where you're trying to move the material to. So to initiate picking from a batch, you click on the picking button. You can also access picking directly from the production supervisor responsibility. This takes you to this Find Batches screen. In this particular example, we're doing picking for a single batch, but if you access it, if you want to do picking for, say, multiple batches, or if you want to find all of the batches that are using a particular ingredient or whatever, you can go to the screen from the production supervisor menu, and you have all of the selection criteria here up in the top section of the screen for finding batches that meet these criteria. You then click the Find button, and that will bring up a list of the batches that meet the criteria entered above. In this case, obviously, just a single batch that we've chosen. Then you next click on the Requirements button, and that takes you to the batch list. Here you can choose to include or exclude specific batches. So obviously you click that Include button next to the batch or batches for which you want to run picking. And you click the Pick Material button at the bottom right. This actually kicks off the picking process itself. It generates a move order, allocates material to the move order based on your picking rules, and also automatically submits a job for the pick slip report. Your move order number is given to you here. Usually a good idea to note that down, although you can always get to it from the batch. And it gives you the request number for the pick slip. If you have any errors, if some of the ingredients were not able to be allocated on the move order, you will get a message here to let you know. You can access the pick slip from the concurrent request screen. This shows the lots that were allocated, the source sub-inventory and locator from where they were allocated, so where you need to go pick them from, and the destination sub-inventory to which the move order is going to move the material. So you can print this out and give it to your shop floor personnel to go and physically do the picking. I've opened up the move order here, which you can access from the inventory responsibility under move orders, or you can also access it by clicking, there's a move order button on the bottom of the batch detail screen. And I've drilled down through a number of screens. There's the move order header summary screen, the move order lines, line allocations, and lot serial. I've drilled all the way down to show which lot was allocated. You kind of have to drill down a number of steps in order to actually get to the lot information. And on previous screens, they show you a lot of the same information that was on the pick slip. What sub-inventory and locator the material is being sourced from, the destination is, etc. You may notice this transaction type over here. That is the transaction type that is used for a move order. So we call it a backflush transfer transaction. That's just the transaction that will actually get created when you transact the move order, when you execute the move order. So the next step is to actually transact the move order, to move the material from the source to the supply sub-inventory and locator specified on the batch line. After the material is moved, the system will also automatically create a reservation in the new location to the batch so that it can't be taken for something else. So to transact your move order, you do this through the inventory responsibility. You go to move orders, and then that path up top is actually incorrect. It should be transact move orders. That retrieves the move order, and then you just click the transact checkbox in the lower right. So that's really the basics of picking rule setup, picking itself, auto detail, automatic. expire within the number of days specified on that shelf life days field on the picking rule. Those are the most common reasons that we see that the material that people expect to be selected is not selected. Okay, some gotchas and some known issues. On the rules workbench, as we discussed before, make sure you specify job or schedule in that transaction source field. Otherwise, the sales order and the batch picking rules can interfere with each other. For picking, if you get a message that there are no ingredients to pick, or when you do your picking, the move order doesn't include some of the ingredients you expected, make sure you've entered a supply sub-inventory and locator on the ingredient line, or set up the rule so that it will default in there. Picking will fail for any ingredients that don't have that because it doesn't know the destination sub-inventory. Another gotcha, if the auto allocation for the move order line fails because of a problem with the picking rule setup, so you do picking, it creates a move order, but it couldn't find what material to allocate to the move order for some reason. The move order line gets canceled immediately. You're not able to go into the move order later and manually allocate a lot to the move order. It just gets canceled immediately. So you must have available inventory at the time that you do picking to create the move order. There are a couple of known bugs which you should be aware of. The first one is if you've entered a shelf life days on the picking rule, the picking rule will not work with items that are not expiration controlled. It will exclude all lots. Obviously, if an item's not expiration controlled, then shelf life days should be irrelevant, and it just shouldn't be looked at, and every lot should be included. But currently, we have a bug where all of the lots are excluded. This is an internal bug. I entered this myself. I found it in some testing I'd done a while ago. If any of you run into the problem yourself, please go ahead and log in SR and ask support to either flip this to a customer bug or log a new bug for you, because obviously priority is given to fixing customer bugs, and once development knows that this has become an issue for a real customer, it will get much higher priority and hopefully will be fixed soon. That goes to the second one also. This is a bug I just ran across actually as I was preparing for this presentation. It seems that select available inventory is currently not sorting based on the FIFO or FIFO rules specified on the picking rule. What it seems to be doing is sorting alphanumerically based on lot number. It is using the picking rule correctly to determine what should be included and excluded. So for example, if you set shelf life days to 30, it will correctly exclude any lots that are going to expire in the next 30 days. It's just not sorting the lots in FIFO or FIFO order. We do have fields on that form to show you the creation date and expiration date. So the information is there for you to be able to pick the lots that you need based on that criteria. It's just not sorting in that order as it should be. So again, I've entered an internal bug for this, but if any of you run into it, do log in SR and reference this bug and make sure that a customer bug gets entered, and then this issue will be given higher priority. So that concludes my presentation. Bonnie, can we open this up to questions and answers?
Yes, thank you, Glenn. A lot of great information. Love the screenshots. I'm sure that's very helpful for everyone. If you have questions at this time, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function if you're listening via the voice streaming. And operator, can you give some instructions for those on the phone that might have questions?
Yes, if you would like to ask an audio question, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad.
Okay, so Glenn, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this. The first question that I have here is, can reservations created using auto detail be changed or edited?
Yes. Once you've run auto detail and a specific lot of inventory, whatever has been reserved to your batch, you always have the option of changing that. You simply need to click on the reservations button on the batch details to go to the item reservations window, and you can edit the reservation, you can delete the reservation, you can change it to a different lot, change the sub-inventory locator. Yeah, you can do anything you want. You're not locked in to that reservation just because you ran auto detail.
Okay, so the next question comes from Srivana. Is auto detail batch or line reservation? Is hard reservation or not?
Auto detail, yes, it does create a hard reservation. It's a detailed reservation. It's down to the sub-inventory locator and lot level, and it is a hard reservation. The system will not allow that material to be taken for any other purpose. The high-level reservations, and the term hard and soft reservation and high-level and detailed reservation, they seem to be used a little bit ambiguously sometimes. Different people use them in somewhat different ways. They're all hard reservations in the sense that the system will not allow reserved inventory to be used for some other purpose. But auto detail is a hard detailed reservation. It's down to the lots of inventory locator level. If you simply use the reserve batch or reserve line options to create a high-level reservation, those simply are at an organization level, and the system will make sure that your total inventory, available inventory at the organization level, does not drop below that point. If you've created a high-level reservation for 20 kilograms, the system will make sure that 20 kilograms is always available from somewhere within this organization, but it's not down at that detailed sub-inventory locator lot level.
Okay, and Glenn, just to make sure that we're not missing anything here, Srivana added a second question that I didn't see until just now, saying, if yes, does this reservation is allocated and considered in ASCP plan? I just want to make sure we don't miss that.
ASCP is going to see the demand from the batch even before you've created a reservation. You don't actually need a reservation in order for ASCP to recognize the demand against an ingredient. I didn't think that, well, okay, I'm not an expert in ASCP, and I don't think ASCP plans down to the lot level, although I'm not quite sure.
Is this something, Glenn, that may be best handled in the value chain planning community, maybe?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I can talk to some people here and get an answer for Srivana. I'm just not sure off the top of my head how detailed the ASC planning gets and whether it goes down to that lot level or locator level, sub-inventory level.
Okay.
But I can find out.
So how about we ask Srivana, if you could please post this question to the process manufacturing community, which, Glenn, I believe you are one of the moderators out there, and we'll pick up that question there and provide Srivana with additional information about this. And it looks like we also have another follow-on here from Shavana. Maintain reservation for batch to sale order. Does this honor in ASCP plan? So again, it sounds like, Shavana, if you could put all of this in a discussion out on the process manufacturing community, and Glenn can follow up with you there after he's had a chance to research it a little bit more. And if you haven't been out to the communities, hang tight, because I'll give you instructions for how to get there.
And let me just clarify what Shavana is asking there, just for everybody on the phone. In addition to reserving against on-hand inventory, which is really everything that we've been talking about has dealt with that type of reservation, an inventory reservation, there's also the ability to reserve between different documents. So, for example, a sales order, rather than reserving against on-hand inventory, can reserve against the pending yield from a batch. And Siobhan is asking about whether that information is seen by ASCP. Likewise, one batch, an ingredient in one batch can be reserved against another batch that's going to yield that same item as a product. So if you're dealing with intermediates, you have one batch that's going to yield an intermediate, and then that intermediate is going to be consumed in a second batch as an ingredient. The second batch can be reserved directly to the first batch, and then once the material is yielded into inventory, the reservation is automatically updated to become an inventory reservation. You can also reserve